The speaker stood behind the podium and addressed the audience. At the 5-minute mark in his talk, he incorrectly named both the company and the products represented by the sales professionals he was speaking in front of. This was a group that I was a senior leader of. The result of his talk? One embarrassed leader, one embarrassed meeting planner, and worst of all, 250 disconnected audience members. The speaker's presence was only memorable because he was a sports celebrity. Money wasted. If you're looking for a speaker for your next sales meeting, conference, broker-dealer event, roadshow, or training symposium, Wholesaler Masterminds Speakers Bureau wants to help. Wholesaler Mastermind Speakers Bureau will connect you and your event with exactly the right speaking professional. Find out more about Wholesaler Mastermind Speakers Bureau at wmmspeakers.com. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. Wholesaler's Bill Acheson is an expert in nonverbal communication. As a faculty member at the University of Pittsburgh for over 20 years, and as a professional speaker since 1994, he's spoken to thousands of people across the United States about how to use body language to communicate more effectively. Find out what companies from AIG to Bayer, Deutsche Bank, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, Sun America, Wells Fargo, the U.S. Coast Guard, and yes, the National Football League have already discovered it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Bill Acheson, welcome to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show.
Thank you very much, Rob. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here and to have you back. Wholesalers, if you're not aware, in the last incarnation of our show, we did a great program with Bill, so go over to the website and check that one out. Bill, in our pre-discussion here, we were talking about something that had me intrigued. So if I'm looking at, Sales 101, if I pull out a Sales 101 book, it's going to tell me that I should be mirroring my prospect or my client. And by mirroring my prospect or my client, they are going to take a shining to me in a way that is, well, irresistible. What do you got to say to that?
I think that's a great idea, but you sure are putting yourself at risk.
Oh.
My work, when we look at mirroring in the academic world, we refer to that as isopraxis. And when we mirror another person, it happens naturally. I mean, if you and I are in agreement, and I remember when we did a face-to-face meeting like this, that's certainly what we were doing. I kind of laughed because we were mirroring all the time. The problem is that when a wholesaler walks into that corner office, he's not necessarily getting someone who's attentive, who's open to his message, who wants to give him 15 or 20 minutes to elaborate on his point. He's probably walking in there with somebody who says, you know what, I'm real busy, I can give you 2 minutes. The guy's tense. He's more likely sitting, leaning back in his chair with his hands behind his head. That is nothing you want to mirror when you're working with a prospect or client. Better set of strategies. I have 6 behaviors, and I'll give them to you real quickly because your group is doing all the first 3 already.
Okay.
A high level of eye contact. Okay. Please realize that when you hand over colorful literature, eye contact in a study by the University of Minnesota would drop from 77% on average to 6.8%. So when you hand over that literature, you're putting yourself at risk right there of losing that personal contact.
Okay.
Number 2, head nodding. Head nodding is something we do when we're showing an effort to get agreement with a prospect. I advise people to head nod when the information might be a shade negative or not necessarily real positive. How are your returns? They're pretty good. Not fantastic. We're not number 1, but we're in the top echelon. That should be a head nod, not a smile. You smile when it's outstandingly positive. And that's the 3rd behavior. So head nodding, eye contact, smiling, they're all doing this. I've worked with wholesalers from a wide range of companies since 1994. And what I find is when that wholesaler walks into an office, almost invariably, they sit on the edge of the seat with a pronounced forward lean. They're eager to show connection. What you're doing when you do that is you're giving up your personal power. You're showing eagerness. The ideal posture, Rob, would be for that individual to sit upright with a slight forward lean, 1 or 2 inches. The presenting information this individual needs to have to make informed decisions for their client. And that's as far as it goes.
All right, I'm going to want. I was going to say.
Oh, go ahead.
No. I'm going to want to pick around that power, that personal power thing, because I think that's really important. But I do want to get through the 6. So let me just make sure I got it right. We got eye contact. We got head nodding. We got smiling when positive. We got the forward lean. What's number 5?
Yeah, just a slight forward lean, 1 or 2 inches.
Okay.
But sit back in the seat. Do not ever sit on the edge of the seat. It's literally showing that you're subservient. Number 5, I think, is one of the big ones when you look at it overall, and that is to keep your hands in full view at all times. If you have arms on the chair on which you're sitting, you put your hands on the arms of the chair. You want to extend your body, especially for the female professionals who are listening. Amy Cuddy does a fantastic job talking about personal power. In her work at Harvard University, she finds that expanding your posture does 2 things chemically. It increases the testosterone, which is how we project personal power, and it decreases the amount of cortisol in the body. Cortisol is the body's natural reaction to fear. So expansive body posturing is extremely good. If you can contract yourself, if you squeeze yourself into a small ball, you've basically lost your personal power. You're not going to be projecting with any degree of confidence. It shows insecurity, it shows reluctance, and it shows fear. Finally, and this may strike people as a bit odd, sell with your feet flat on the floor. If you're sitting in front of a prospect or client, the most natural thing in the world for a male or a female is to cross your legs. It's a defensive posturing. You know, when people ask me how I read the audience when I'm doing a keynote address, the answer is very simple. I look for exposure of the stomach, solar plexus exposure. That solar plexus, that stomach area, is the one part of every mammal that is not protected by a skeletal structure. And when you find you're exposing the stomach, you're showing openness, you're showing confidence. And that's precisely where you want to be. With your legs crossed, you're sealing off. With your feet flat on the floor, typically 1 foot about 4 inches in front of the other, you're showing the highest amount of confidence that you can, and it actually changes the body chemistry. Oh, and one more point, Rob, before we leave isopraxis. Isopraxis works. Mirroring works, but we have it backwards. The ideal would be to have that prospect mirror you. That's when you know they're in agreement and you're ready to begin a long-running professional relationship.
So, Bill, I have to rewind for just 1 second. The reason I'm rewinding is, and maybe our audience is feeling the same way, I want to go back to the whole notion of the solar plex, the abdomen. Help me get through that last one there, because I'm picturing myself standing in front of an audience like you do and doing a speaking engagement like you do. Tell me what the body posture is there. What am I actually looking for? Because obviously I'm not going to see a man or a woman's bare midriff as the disclosure. What am I looking for?
Well, in a seated position, you're looking for someone with their feet flat on the floor, arms extended out to the side. If there's a desk involved or a conference room table, hands on the table in full view and separate them. When you sit with your arms folded or your legs crossed, you're really contracting your behavior. And what happens is you chemically change the hormonal structure in your body. You increase fear, you decrease confidence, because we literally have chemicals that will project each. Now, as a stand-up speaker, I have a rule of thumb, and it works standing as well as sitting. And it's a fantastic rule. If you remember nothing else from this message, this would not be a bad one to take home. Movement and power are going to be inversely related. Whether you're sitting or standing, the more you move, the more you fidget, the more you twist the top on that felt tip marker when you're standing next to the dry erase marker board, the greater the amount of movement, the greater the amount of what we call adapter behavior or discomfort that you're projecting to the audience. The person who shows confidence moves the least.
Wholesaler.
Think about it.
Oh,
go ahead.
No. I'm going to ask our audience to think about it. Wholesalers. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about that. I want you, wholesalers. I want you to think for a second about the last presentation that you did, and were you doing kind of the Chris Rock stalking, because you thought that was the good behavior? Or were you showing that power through your lack of movement? Bill, that's a huge, important point, and I thank you for making that one.
It really is. And when you see yourself on video, for years I've trained public speakers, and I've gotten away from it about 8 or 9 years ago. And what I used to do is I'd ask them to do a 5-minute presentation that I would videotape. And when I did the videotaping, they fully expected me to play it back so I could go over the fine points. You know what, Rob? I never played it back. I would press play at the end of what I had recorded, and then I would hold down the rewind button. I would show them what they looked like at high speed backwards. Oh. There were people who were running in space. There were people who stood there with their hands down by their side, and they were trying to gesture, but they really weren't confident, and they literally lifted their palms from their legs repeatedly, which I called the penguin sequence. It was fascinating to see in high speed backwards what people really looked like. And I can tell you right now, I did that for over 20 years. I remember saying each and every time, do you have any questions? And not once did a person say yes. Wow. The answer was abundantly clear. If there was something they were doing inappropriately, it was going to be exaggerated in that format.
Wow. All right. Let's keep going because we got so much time, or so much to cover and such a precious little amount of time. I want to talk a little bit more about personal power. You opened this notion about personal power. I want to know more about it. You told me a little bit in the pre-call about something that happened with the National Football League. So let's make sure that we're giving our listeners, both our leaders and our wholesalers, make sure we're giving our listeners some really good information about personal power and how to project better personal power.
Okay, absolutely. Rule 1, minimize your movement. What we're going to find is that the less you move, the more confidence you're projecting. Expansive behavior is really important. The number one gesture you can exhibit when you're standing in front of an audience, for example, is opening your palms and holding your arms out to the side. That is the most widely received gesture. It's always a positive. And people haven't figured this out for some reason, but when you're speaking to a group, whether it's 12 people, 2 people, or 70, extend your arms so that the palms include the outside elbows of the audience. You want to be aiming at the outside elbows on the front row, essentially. That is the way that we measure gestures in a public forum. When you're sitting one-on-one, the gestures should be limited, but they should be decisive. If that elbow is remaining on the arm of the chair, you're not doing enough. You want to involve those arms. The number one gesture that we find is a karate chop. Okay, if you're making a point, it's a very effective tool to use that karate chop gesture. Ideally, when you're pointing, you never want to point with one finger. It's almost always experienced as a negative. You want to point with an open palm. You want to use gestures that are expansive, wider than average, showing a high amount of confidence. Okay. When I'm looking at people, if I walk into a Kiwanis Club luncheon, for example, or you know what, let's go to Merrill Lynch. I'm going to walk into a lunch meeting in Florham Park, New Jersey, which I did recently. I look at the room. I'm going to try to pick out the top performers in the room. There are 4 behaviors I'm going to look for in the males. See if you don't agree. Number 1, first and foremost, relaxed muscle tone. I'm going to look for the person who shows the highest amount of muscle relaxation. What they're projecting there is the absence of fear. Mm-hmm. They have it figured out. They have a system, and it works. Number 2, pronounced backward lean. Well, I don't advocate that for your folks because they're selling. I do look at that customer base, and my general rule of thumb with regards to high net worth, high personal power, and high social status is this. The further back they lean, the more I want their business.
Okay.
Number 3, expansiveness. If it's a male, I expect him to spread out all over the place. I even look at the fingers. That's one of the best tips I've ever gotten in a social event. When I've got a fellow with his arm extended across the love seat and his fingers are extended and splayed, he's showing high personal power. When he rolls up his fingers and holds one hand in the other, he's showing fear and insecurity. So relaxed muscle tone, pronounced backward lean, expansiveness in one form or another. And the sole exception to that would be something we call the aristocratic leg cross. Only 12% of men in the United States actually sit with one knee on top of the other. Most of us cradle a calf or an ankle into the knee. But males who sit with one knee atop the other, if they fold their arms at the wrist over the knee, you're looking at the classic image of the aristocratic leg cross. High social status, high personal power, and high net worth. Final indicator I'm going to look for is body asymmetry. I'm going to run a line down the center of the body. I expect one leg up, one leg down, one arm up, one arm down. It's hard to show power symmetrically. It's very easy to exhibit it when you're asymmetrical.
So these are some of the signatures to look for or to be able to project when you are wishing to present power in a nonverbal sense. I know that the clock ticks. Let's talk about the NFL, because as soon as you say NFL, a fair amount of our audience perks up and says, Bill worked with the NFL. What do you learn? What do they have to say? So tell us more.
Well, the NFL, it's kind of an interesting thing. I working with the NFL, I worked with the marketing group. I received an email from a fellow who is number 2 in marketing, in the marketing department at the National Football League. And he said, I am in New York City. I work for the National Football League. I don't know if you remember me, but in 1994, I took your class in body language. This fellow, his name is Doug Smoyer. He had an interview with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I remember him. I remember him as a young man. He came to me after class one day and said, look, in about an hour and a half, I've got an interview with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I really want this job. What can I do to project greater personal power in that interview so that I can be seen as a competent individual? And I gave him the 6 details that we've already talked about: high eye contact, head nodding, smiling, hands out to the side, feet flat on the floor, slight forward lean. He said they actually told me they were just interviewing as a courtesy, and yet when he was done with his 1-hour interview, Rob, they hired him. That was one of the first examples I had that personal power was a really effective tool in a one-on-one situation.
What a great story. All right, I got one more, because I'm just going to use as much of your time as I can squeeze out of you here. I want to know about handshakes. Okay, so I don't know if you got the same pet peeve I do, Bill, but if somebody comes at me with a limp fish handshake, I'm already off put. But you've got, I thought it was 5. You've corrected me. You've got 6. You've got 6 different styles of handshake and some things that they tell us. Go ahead. Tell us what they are, because I want to know.
I will. Not only am I going to do that, I'm going to show you how to analyze the non-shaking hand. I think you get the best data from the left arm and the left hand in a handshake. So let's begin. All handshakes are about personal power. The rule in this century is that there should be no gender distinctions in a handshake, so the same is true for women or men. It used to be that we had a feminine handshake, and when you go into the Deep South, you'll still see it, but we strongly recommend against it. It's gender neutral from now on. So in a handshake, we are projecting personal power, and you get one of 3 messages. I have more power than you. You and I are equals. That's a great way to start a relationship. Or I have less power than you. Here we go. The cooperator, a one-handed handshake, perfectly vertical with medium muscle tension, says you and I are equals. When that person comes in, he's being literally fair and square. If the muscles are a little more firmly flexed than yours, you tense up a little bit. If they're a little softer, you lighten up just a bit. But that's fine. You're looking for that amount of tension. The second handshake is a simple little twist of the wrist. He comes in with a downward turned palm. The dominator handshake may not seem like a big deal, but look at the language here. This fellow is literally saying to you, I have the upper hand. It is a handshake that is associated with personal power. It's associated to a small degree with manipulation. It's certainly used that way by some folks. But when you get a downward turned palm, don't change it. You're gathering information here. That's when you say this person's socially aware because they know what they're doing here. And I have to be aware as well. I have to heighten my awareness level just a little bit. Third handshake, upward turned palm. Extremely rare in the United States. It would mean I'm a little insecure. I might need additional rapport building in order to be comfortable. Outside North America, that upward turned palm is called The submissive handshake, it literally acknowledges a lower social class. So I'm in the servant class, I'm providing a service to you. That would be a very common thing outside North America. Here on this continent, it just doesn't play that way. The dead fish handshake that you mentioned earlier is actually my favorite. It comes in 2 packages. So when someone holds out that limp-wristed hand, I want you to know that it's very possible you are getting the most powerful handshake in the culture.
Oh.
Think about it. I'm gonna move to interpreting the eye contact in order to get a better understanding of what's going on with this handshake. So I extend the limp-wristed handshake, and I am looking around the room, checking out the lighting and the artwork. You are getting a dismissive handshake, and that's my term for it. My message to that person is literally this: you are so socially insignificant here. I just want you to understand your place. And I think we understand it subconsciously because I've met very few people who don't have a pretty strong emotional reaction when they get that limp-wristed handshake accompanied with broken eye contact. But let's analyze that a little bit more deeply. What you're doing is you're getting a variation of the papal ring kiss. Okay? When you meet the Pope, you're not going to get a bone crusher from that little guy. He's going to extend a very soft hand. And again, here's a handshake formula that works better than 80% of the time. Think about it. It's absolutely on the money. The firmness of the grasp in a handshake is inversely related with the net worth, the personal power, and the social status. I'm worth $17 million. Do you see me giving you a bone crusher to impress you? I don't think so. You're going to get a very soft handshake. I'll acknowledge the social niceties, but I'm still not going to give you that full level of commitment. When I get a bone crusher, all right, which is our 5th type of handshake, that bone crusher says, I am insecure. I'm trying to compensate for something I don't feel I'm able to project otherwise. It's funny because men see a bone crusher handshake as powerful. Women see it as marking insecurity. And when we look at the interpretation, they're absolutely correct. It does indicate insecurity. Let me back up just a notch, Rob. I don't want to lose the other interpretation. When you get that dead fish handshake, if you're shaking hands with an older person, they may have worked in a professional world where women were not a large part of the audience, and they were told that handshakes should show respect for that woman. They're going in assuming very often that there's a different kind of handshake that should be extended to professional women. They don't mean any harm by it. You can identify these people because when they're giving that limp-wristed handshake, they're looking you right in the eye, okay? And so there are some interpretations that need to be made at that level for that thing to make sense.
Sure. So what's the sixth one?
The number 6 handshake is the two-handed handshake. In an election year, it's terrific to note that this is called a politician's handshake. I will tell you right now, in a selling situation, when you give a two-handed handshake, in a study I did in this industry, over 80% of the time, it was perceived as a false attempt to accelerate rapport. People just saw it as trying too hard, extending too much. And so that two-handed handshake, however, is very important. And it belongs in 2 places in our culture. Number one, if you are meeting a very obvious senior citizen, I'm talking someone in their mid-70s or older, that is a show of respect, and that is acceptable if you're meeting that person for the first time. The other time where a two-hander is appropriate is when you find yourself in a situation where you have a long-running professional relationship with someone, but you meet sporadically. You and I meet once or twice a year. That two-handed handshake will show value for a treasured relationship that is a long-term experience. But those are the only 2 scenarios in which I see using that two-handed handshake safely and comfortably.
Wholesalers, I got a challenge for you. And the challenge is I want you to go back and listen to all of this a second time. You see, because Bill has been so generous with so many ideas and so many concepts that as your host, I couldn't follow it all, and I defy you to have gotten it all on the first pass. So wholesalers, go back, have a second listen to this. Bill, you never disappoint. I so appreciate when you come on the show. There's just, as I just said, gobs of information that I just have to, process. but it's all actionable. And I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us here. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Bill. Wholesalers, come back next time and join us on the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. Thank you for listening, wholesalers. Visit us at wholesalermasterminds.com.